Hello. Hi, we're about to start. We usually start right on time, so people can trickle in. This room is meant for 200 people, and we don't have 200. We only have like 140, so you might want to squeeze in a little bit. Anyway, we're really excited. It's our first time at Microsoft. We're really excited to have them as our partner. And thank you for some of our other sponsors, Harry Greeley at Christian Wakefield for helping with the food. Patrick Fuller with helping with the food, and we got wine and beer this time, so it's pretty exciting. We usually hold our events at New York Institute of Technology, and they don't allow that, so this is kind of a treat. I'm going to introduce David Carlos with my homepage. He's going to kind of start us off and introduce Bruce Bockenheimer, who's going to be our moderator, and we have a fabulous panel today, and Bruce will introduce them to you. So enjoy and come up and see me afterwards. I'd love to get your card and keep in touch with you. I have a whole stack of them.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Disruptive Technologists. I'm David Carlos. I'm actually the co-founder and chief product officer at a company called My Homepage, which is, as somebody said, how very 80s of you. We're changing it. It's actually going to become Apptilio, so it's much more modern. We believe in apps. But I want to tonight actually not focus on me. I want to focus on you. Because my goal here in the next 5 minutes is to warm you up. Because you're all looking a little chilly. Some of you sitting there shivering. It could be the air conditioning, but it could also be the lack of David Carlos in your life. So first, let's start with who is here from PACE? Yeah, go Setters. Awesome. Okay. Who's here from UC Berkeley? Nice. Awesome, go Bears! Very cool, very cool. All right, so I have a joke. Now this joke actually came from Lauren. It's by way of Lauren, although it is from Sam Stovall at S&P Capital. So now you know who to blame. What is the difference between an introverted technologist and an extroverted technologist? An introverted technologist. Oh my God, okay. An extrovert looks at your shoes. No, you can't steal my thunder. Okay, so he kind of got it right. So an introverted technologist stares at his own shoes. An extroverted technologist stares at your shoes. Okay, so that's from Sam. I know it's awful, so I brought a good one, okay? All right. An old man thinks that his wife is losing her hearing. So he goes to the doctor and he says, Doc, I think my wife, she's going deaf. The doctor says, okay, here's a test for you. Stand behind her and speak in a quiet voice. Start 20 feet away and see if she can hear you. So, okay, this is a great idea, right? Then go closer and closer until he figures out what her hearing is. So he goes home, stands behind his wife, says, honey, what's for dinner? He doesn't hear anything. Goes 15 feet behind her. Honey, what's for dinner? 5 feet behind her. 10 feet, 5 feet. Accelerate. 5 feet behind her. What's for dinner? Doesn't hear anything. Finally, she turns around and yells at him, for the 4th time, it's lasagna. All right. Now that you are all sufficiently warm and enthralled, and you've been David Carlos-ized, I would like to introduce Bruce Bockenheimer. He is a clinical professor of management and the executive director of the Entrepreneurship Lab at Pace University. Here he is. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here again. Welcome. And just to start, if I could ask everyone not to turn off their cell phones, but just to silence them. And we'll, if you would like to tweet, we put up the disruptive text and the panelists with their Twitter handles. Okay.
I gotta interrupt. I'm sorry. It's the first time ever being simulcast. So if you say anything, you're going to be all over the place. We're going live tonight. And I also wanted to thank our founding sponsor, Ed Skip McLaughlin, for providing the information and being our first real founding sponsor, who's going to be with us for the whole year. Thanks.
Okay. And to get people to encourage you to tweet, Microsoft made a nice donation, a block of gold, to anyone that gets 100 retweets using the @Microsoft handle. It's £5. Pass it along. So again, tweet, use the @Microsoft handle, get 100 retweets, £5 of gold, that's 80 ounces. It's not 24 karat, it's only 10 karat industrial. April Fools. It's a block of copper. So, it might be. But please do tweet. So just to give you a quick overview of the time frame, the event goes from 6:45 to 8:15. 8:15 to 8:30, we'll have a Q&A. And then from 8:30 to 10:30, the Disruptive Happy Hour. So just to get started with the idea of, I thought that I'd use an example I sometimes use with my students. This idea, is it about, just having a great idea, or is it, the business model and making money, and being able to compete and implement it that really matters? So one thing, it might not be the best analogy, but one I like to use is, if I could transport everyone back 40 years to 1975, and you know everything you know now about computers. If you think about what hardware computers were like in 1975, virtually non-existent, right? So you know everything that happened with computer hardware. You know everything that happened with software and the mouse. You know everything that happened with the internet. You know everything that happened with social media. You know everything that happened with apps. You know everything that happened, right? But here you are in 1975, and I give you $500 and a garage. And you have all these wonderful ideas. Can you outcompete these two guys? So is it, just, an idea, or is it the ability to really, implement it and do something? And that's what we're going to talk about. And I think there's very few people that, knowing all you know now, you can have all these, wonderful, cool ideas, but is it really, something you could turn into a profit? Could you, recruit great talent? Could you sign on great partners? Can you build a great brand? Can you get customers the way these two guys starting out in 1975 did? One other thing I use in class, it's just a very short clip, but if you're familiar with the video, Other People's Money, here's Danny DeVito talking about, profit and the role of money.
I don't make anything. I'm making you money. And lest we forget, that's the only reason any of you became stockholders in the first place. You want to make money. You don't care if they manufacture wire and cable, fry chicken, or grow tangerines. You want to make money. I'm the only friend you've got. I'm making you money.
So it was a clip from Other People's Money, and that idea of, what is the purpose of the company? Is it the social benefit? Should they be loyal and all? But in the end, it's about making money. So I know we're having a debate. We're not trying to determine what is right or wrong, but I thought I'd introduce that. And again, that idea of is it just an idea? Is it able to implement the idea? And how do you turn that into making money? So I'm going to just briefly introduce myself and give it on the panel, and then the panel will give their own introductions in a bit more detail. So as was said, I'm a clinical professor of management. That's my full-time job as a professor at Pace, teaching mainly entrepreneurship classes. I also run the entrepreneurship lab at Pace. I'm on the board of the MIT Enterprise Forum in New York, and do a number of other things involved with entrepreneurship in New York, NYC, EDC's eLab NYC, the Disruptive Technologists Advisory Board. And from this area, before Pace, I'm not a career academic. I started a couple companies both in the US and overseas, and worked for a government contractor the senior systems analyst for a forensic firearms identification system, and did a bunch of different things, including spending 7 years on my boat sailing the Caribbean and South America. But the panel, we're really have a great panel. You know, kudos, Lauren, for putting together the panel, and thank you for the participation. Ed Skip McLaughlin, an entrepreneur, business executive, investor, and author. You can see the book. Thatcher Bell, the managing partner at Co-Venture and an investor in residence at Cornell Tech. Harry Edelson, a distinguished investor, investment manager, venture capitalist, securities analyst, engineer, and the founder and general partner of Edelson Technology Partners. And Patrick Fuller, the founder and CEO of Auticus. So if I could, starting right here with Skip, why don't I ask you to introduce yourself and your firm and just opening comments, and then I'll moderate, ask a few questions of each of the panelists, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Thanks very much. Can you all hear me okay? Excited to be here. Name's Skip McLaughlin. It says Ed Skip McLaughlin. I lost the skip as I got into business, and then I realized that was the best part of me, so I've reintroduced myself. I have started 4 businesses. One of them failed miserably. One of them became an Inc. 500 company and was sold to a Fortune 100 company. So I was fortunate to experience both ends of the continuum. Currently, I'm an angel investor, and also I've written a book. This is not the book, but this is a pre-release copy of the book, okay? The actual book itself is called The Purpose is Profit. I do believe in profit. I don't think I believe it as strong as Danny DeVito does at the cost of anything. But I do believe that's the reason why businesses are formed and why they become successful. I guess I'll pass it over to my compadre here, Harry Edelson.
This works. Hi, folks. How many people are here to find the company they could invest in? Raise your hand. How many people are here to hear the speakers? How many people are here to eat the pizza? Pizza wins. There you go.
Yeah.
Go. They look starved, actually. Yeah. Well, I'm doing a lot of things. I'm investing. Just made 2 investments 2 weeks ago. I expect to make 10 to 50 times my money because they are disruptive technologies. I'm a member of the World Policy Institute, the Juilliard Council, the Wall Street Club, Chinese Business Lawyers Association, and who knows what else. I keep busy. I play softball every Sunday with guys in their 20s and 30s. And at my age, a little higher than that, I've won 15 games in a row pitching, fastball pitching. So I'm still doing everything I did when I was a kid. And I still feel like I'm a kid. I remember I was disruptive in the class. I had a high school teacher named Kaufman. And I remember that the Daily News used to put out a little entrance thing if you wanted to join the Golden Gloves. And he was always scratching himself, so we knew him. He was always scratching his groin. So I filled it out and I said, Itchy Balls Kaufman, 160-pound, middleweight. And I passed it around the room. And everyone started laughing like crazy. And then the teacher went up, grabbed the application blank and said, who did this? Well, no one said anything, but they all looked at me. So that's how I spent my youth, just having a good time. And as far as what everyone is saying about just making money, I don't believe in that. I believe that the basis of life is to be happy. Make money while you're happy doing it. If you're making money and you're not happy, that's not why you want to do things, okay? So I'm happy every day of my life. I've never had a bad day. Every day is great. I've never had a headache, never had the flu, never had chicken pox, never missed a day of work or school or baseball or softball because I'm happy every day, and happy people are healthy people. So I wrote a book, Positivity. It'll be out in a few months, and it is how to be happier, healthier, smarter, and more prosperous. And I go into all 4 of those. I teach you how to say 88 times 95, 8360, 65 times 65, 4225, 27 times 33, 891. It's all those secrets are in the book, and you could do it just as fast as me, and you could learn these tricks in 5 minutes. You could give me 100 things to remember in any order. You could say, this is 69, 4-door convertible is 81. Give it to me, and I'll give it back to you in any order in 15 minutes. These are just tricks. It's like magicians. They have tricks. I have tricks. I didn't know I could read fast. I went to Evelyn Wood Reading Dynamics. I went in at 500 words a minute. I don't really remember. They gave you a test. I had the best comprehension. 8 weeks later, I was reading 4,000 words a minute. I didn't know I could read that fast. So there's people in this audience who can do so much better. You could learn a musical instrument. You could write a book. You can do so many things. You could learn to read faster. And hey, if you can read as fast as I can read, you can read a book a day, not a book a month. Who's going to be smarter?
Well, my class is here. We're on a field trip, so I'm going to tell them they'll take that to heart.
Okay.
And Thatcher?
Bruce, good luck.
Thank you.
Who has a baseball? 'Cause awesome. Yeah? Should we do that now or should we do it at the end? What do people think? Do you have to warm up?
No, I don't need any warm-ups. 4 or 5, I'm ready to go.
Are you gonna like break his hand?
It might be. You know, I have 3 pitches. Slow, slower, and slowest.
I would love to see it.
Pitch this way, that way, drop. That's the whole secret. And a changeup. Slow, slower, and slowest.
Is there anyone from Microsoft in the room? Oh, we're simulcast, aren't we?
Yes.
I don't know. You may have a national audience.
They can read my book.
All right. Maybe if there are enough questions about, can you show me your fastball? We'll get to see that at the end. I'm Thatcher Bell. I'm a partner at CoVenture. We're an early stage venture capital firm. We develop software products together with founders for new startups in exchange for equity. We also invest small amounts of cash in those companies on a selected basis. I've been a more traditional venture capitalist and an angel investor for about 10 years before that. Most recently at a firm called Gotham Ventures for the better part of that 10 years, where I became a partner. I'm still a venture partner there. And I spend about a day a week at Cornell Tech, the new Cornell Applied Sciences grad school in Manhattan, as investor in residence. Good to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Frailer, the startup founder of Oticus. We started about 3 years ago. Beforehand, I was a healthcare investor at Bain Capital, where I covered medical devices, so that's how I got into the hearing aid industry. And beforehand, I was at McKinsey doing strategy consulting for healthcare companies as well, and before that, I was an engineer at MIT. Very happy to be here.
Okay, thank you. And I remember you presenting at an MIT Enterprise Forum event that we held probably a year or two ago.
Yep.
Do you want to mention what Oticus does? Because I thought it was impressive, changing the price of the hearing aid.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, so basically Oticus makes hearing aids far more affordable and accessible by dealing with the customer directly online. Typically, hearing aids cost somewhere between $3,000 to $5,000 per ear, and it's in stark contrast to the cost to make a hearing aid, which is closer to say $200. So that big discrepancy in the cost to make it and the cost to the end consumer is really driven by a lot of intermediaries, middlemen in the dispensing process or the retail process. And so what we ended up designing was a completely online delivery mechanism for hearing aids that cuts out a lot of these middleman costs. So essentially, it's almost like buying contact lenses or eyewear online. The only difference is that instead of spending $3,000, you can get a very equivalent type of technology for closer to, let's say, $600. So since we launched about 2 to 3 years ago, we saved people close to $12 million in hearing aid or healthcare costs, and we've transformed thousands of lives as a result of it. So we're pretty happy and pretty proud about the impact it's had.
Great, thank you, Patrick. So to open up with a question, Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics, once famously said, "Ideas are a dime a dozen. People who could implement them are priceless." So I wanted to ask the panel, and we could go right down again, do you believe this idea that ideas are a dime a dozen and people who can implement them are priceless are kind of an absolute truth? And what exactly is the value of a cool idea? We start with Skipper.
Yeah, sure. Well, I definitely think that implementation trumps a cool idea. And I think we see that every day. I know that when I invest in a company, I'm looking for the people, the team, and the cool idea comes second. It's important that it's a good idea, but if we don't have the right people to follow through and implement, figure out the steps and make it happen, I think that's what makes success.
Harry, I'm sure you have a thought on this.
I agree with the premise, but there is a difference. So I'm huge potential and good management. So if you see a company with good potential, it's going to be great. But we do not have the right management. I go out and bring in a CEO and a CFO or whatever I need to take that idea and run with it. And if the person who brought me the deal doesn't agree, it's goodbye. So that's the one difference that I would say that you have to consider. I just did a deal 2 weeks ago, parachuted in a CEO who was the head of 4 telecommunications companies, great guy, and he will make the difference in this company, and I think I'll make 10 to 30 times my money on that investment within 3 years. They expect revenues of $2.5 million this year, 17 next year, 67 the year after, and then goes up from there. And I can explain why those forecasts are very reasonable, because they're selling to people who can buy hundreds or even thousands of what they're selling, which is telecommunications on ships at sea.
So I think he'd be okay if I used his name. Aaron Price, anybody know Aaron Price, who runs New Jersey Tech Meetup? He has some good events too, you should hit. Anyway, he's a serial entrepreneur, and he started another company fairly recently. And I hadn't heard exactly the idea that he described to me before when he talked to me about it the first time. And I thought of a couple people that I would want to talk to about it who might be helpful to him. And I said, hey, do you mind if I start talking to people about this? And having been around the block more than once, he said, no, absolutely. Talk to whoever you want. The idea doesn't matter. All that matters is how well I get this done. And so, my experience has been that not only is that true in general, but that it's an interesting litmus test for me in the experience level of an entrepreneur. There's almost a correlation between the extent to which an entrepreneur is protective of an idea and their lack of experience. So the more experienced folks like Aaron try to shout their idea from the rooftop kind of from day one for a variety of reasons that we can get into. So that's kind of my general bias, and that's my experience. That said, it's been interesting spending now a little bit of time over the last 6 or 9 months at Cornell Tech, where some of what I'm doing is working with faculty and PhD students who are trying to commercialize or productize their research. And in those cases, there's some unique technology. They're not just different ideas, but they're truly new developments in some cases, new algorithms, new pieces of hardware that utilize technologies that heretofore have not existed. And so in those cases, and in select cases in my investing history, I have seen companies or entities that had value solely because of the intellectual property, But particularly in the software world, those companies are the exception as opposed to the rule, and maybe broadly speaking, they're the exception as opposed to the rule. But I'm kind of learning, relearning some things in my career, spending time in academia. But if you're not a PhD and you're not, sort of winning the praise and surprise of the most educated people in your field for your idea, then it probably is not going to be the difference between success and failure.
I generally tend to agree with that, especially what Skip said. I think the execution is really ultimately what creates the value. Starting a business and running it is almost like running a marathon, and having a great idea will cut you a little bit of slack in the beginning. It's almost like having a couple of yards of head start at a marathon, which is at some point not going to move the needle that much, but it will give you a bit of slack at the beginning. But it's worthy to know that maybe you see that most very successful companies started on a crappy idea, and then at some point started iterating towards something that had a lot of value, that was scalable, and that brought a lot of use to people. So yeah, the execution and the person who drives it, or the team that drives it from the very onset, is what ultimately makes the difference.
Great. No, and on Thatcher's comment about this inverse relationship between the experience of the entrepreneur and the desire to keep the idea secret. So the more experienced you are, the more you want to shout out from the rooftops. A lot of nascent entrepreneurs get concerned, non-disclosure agreement and all that, but the idea is get it out there, tell people. So I worked at a IQ Venture Capital for a while, and when people came in, it was funny because they'd say, we have something no one else has. That morning we've heard 3 other pitches for the same thing, but the director, he said, listen, I dare you to take your idea, send it to who you think the top 10 people or 20 people that would steal it. Send them an email saying you have this and you'd like to just tell them about it and see if you could get like 1 email reply. Forget about getting someone to steal your idea. You're not going to get anyone to even reply to your email. So, unless, as I said, if you're a PhD, you're doing something in a very specific field, you have a unique algorithm, a biomedical, special gene, something, very, very scientific and unique, where there is truly protectable intellectual property that you have to, keep quiet, fine, but that doesn't mean everything has to be kept quiet. So with that idea of the team and the manager, it's a good segue to the next question. Another popular expression, particularly in the VC or investment world, is the idea of always bet on the jockey, not the horse. In other words, the jockey is the entrepreneurial team, and the horse is the idea. Or they will always try to side with an A team that has a B idea rather than a B team that has an A idea, because the A team is going to make the idea happen. And a lot of time the idea changes over time. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, the role of the jockey instead of the horse, or the A team with a B idea instead of vice versa, and if there's any examples that you might cite that you've came across in your professional background.
Do you mind if I go at this first? Well, here's a cool idea. I was approached, I think it's a cool idea, and you tell me. I was approached about 6 months ago by a gentleman who I've done some business with in the past, and he said to me, you need to come to this meeting. It's going to take place at Aon headquarters, and all these insurance executives are going to come in, and then Larry King is going to come in with his wife, and then Carlos Slims is going to come in. This is a true story. So I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, even just to go meet these people and to see, could this possibly be true? And I said, well, what is this hub about? And he said, there's this new business model called Collector's Cafe. Has anybody heard of that? Okay. Hopefully in about 6 months you will, or you'll know I've lost some money. So I go into the meeting, and the founder of this business says, what we're doing is we're monetizing the collectibles business. We've got a central platform where all the collectibles will be available. We're connecting it to a TV show hosted by Larry and Sean King, and Carlos Slims is going to put it on his mobile application across South America. Now, to me, that sounds like a pretty cool, big idea. I go to the meeting, there's the head of AIG, Lloyd's of London, different people walk in, Larry King comes in, Carlos Slims couldn't make it, but he is behind the idea. And they asked me afterwards, are you interested in investing? And it seemed the idea was so cool, and you could see since collectibles make 20% coming and going when you do a transaction, that it would probably have some pretty good upside potential. So I got caught into the idea. But tonight, as I went through the thinking and some of the questions, I really had to reflect on, if it's really all about implementation, then this was a really cool idea, but the implementation is what's going to make it successful. So there's one other big investor, and he owns a winery, Rodney Strong Winery. And I met with him, and we had dinner, and he said, what do you think about this idea? And I said, I'm pretty excited. I mean, it seems like it has all the pieces to be a phenomenal success. And I said, but he looked at me and he said, I'm telling you right now, this is all about execution. And he's 100% right. So if that TV show doesn't come out in the next 3 months, I took a haircut. Go ahead.
Well, once again, sure, if you get the right jockey, it's great. But if you follow the horses, the owners keep putting new jockeys on their horses. They might win the Kentucky Derby, and they'll put somebody on it for the Preakness, somebody else. So getting the right jockey means hiring the right person for that job. Do you need a marketing person? Do you need a lawyer? Do you need an engineer? So many times, while the saying is correct, you have to modify it. I want to get the right person for the right job. So how many times have you heard about a great little company where they have an engineering start and everybody's an engineer and they do not know how to market their product? So you've got to change. You got to tell the head of engineering, you're now head of engineering, you're not the CEO. I've done that probably 4 dozen times. You have to get the right jockey, but not necessarily the one who's working at that time. You have to import him in and get everybody to cooperate with him.
So, when I, throughout most of my investing career, when I get involved with a company for the first time, and in particular now, it's pretty early in the life of a company. Generally, there are just a few people in the company, often just the founders. And in that case, my experience is that 2 things really matter. By far, the most important is those people. And then the second thing is the market that they're pursuing. And when I've lost sight of that, I've screwed up. So I met a number of years ago, for example, with a founder who really impressed me. And I remember having the conversation and going back at the time to my partners at Gotham Ventures and telling them that this guy is amazing. He's going to do great things. He's starting to build an incredible team. But I don't think this business is for us. It's a new niche social network. Facebook had become hegemonic in the social network world already. And so I thought, this is not for us, but I'm going to stay in touch with this guy because we definitely want to be involved in his next thing. And so that guy's name is Jason Goldberg, and the company that he started is called Fab. And it's had its trials and tribulations since then, but suffice it to say that the company is worth a hell of a lot more than it was when I met with Jason for the first time. And what I learned from that was that Jason's next business, and this is pretty typical for founders who are just getting going in a new company, was the same company. So Fab started out as a niche social network and became the e-commerce site that you know now. And so that was kind of the negative. I've had the positive experience there too of being fortunate enough to work with entrepreneurs who had their second or their third business when I was on the cap table for the one company in which I invested. So that's been my experience with the importance of founders.
Yeah, in my experience dealing with investors, I think this question, whether it's the horse or the jockey, I think really depends a lot on where you are in the cycle of fundraising. In our case, we raised one round of financing, and that round of financing came primarily from angel investors that first and foremost cared about me. They liked me as an entrepreneur. They thought that I had the skill set and like the blood in the eye to go out there and execute and test whether the horse was a horse and not a giraffe or something else. And so it was really at the beginning. It's about that. It's about proving that the idea is worth something, right? And so in that first round of investment, it is really the jockey that matters a lot, because also the jockey is the one that is going to be the one who's going to be attracting the crew, right? The horse by itself is not going to maintain itself. It's going to need a whole team to make sure it's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, right? So from that standpoint, as you progress in time and you raise more and more rounds, the idea becomes more solidified and more cast in stone. And so that's when you can cut a little bit more slack on that front. And that's when investors maybe care a little bit less, or still care a lot about the team, but the importance of the idea is a little less.
Thanks. And on that, I had my dentist up in Dobbs Ferry believed that his son was going to be a true entrepreneur and was going to be incredibly successful. And he started a social network too. The dentist's name is Ed Zuckerberg. His son is Mark. So the next question on the popular front, the TV show Shark Tank has developed pretty broad audience, not just people that are interested in entrepreneurs, young and old, business people and not, and it's become again very popular with a very broad audience. And I don't watch it all that often, but what I do, one thing that impresses me is that when the person making the pitch has this idea, and you could see some of the sharks kind of grimace like, what is that? And they don't seem to be too thrilled with the idea. They don't think it's exactly a cool idea. But then if they ask about sales or profitability, and the person does in fact have real sales and decent profitability, they're like sharks in a feeding frenzy. They want to be part of it. So the point is, even when they didn't think the idea was cool, when they were able to prove that real traction, the real sales, the real profit, they were very interested. I was wondering, if you have any takeaways from the show you might care to share. And, if you were looking at someone, how might you value or weigh the difference between an idea that you thought, forget about being a cool idea, might be a downright what you think silly idea, but they've proven that they've gotten sales and profits?
Well, I think we've all seen Shark Tank. I find it to be phenomenally entertaining and a wonderful show. It seems like it's brought the whole concept of entrepreneurism in everyone's living room. And I do agree with Barry. As soon as an idea is presented, sometimes it seems like, oh, I would never be interested in that. And then they ask the question, do you have any sales or do you have any profits? And sure enough, if they have profits and they have the potential to see those profits grow, the interest is perked up by everyone. And I'm a strong believer in that. I believe in the profit mandate. I wrote a book called The Purpose is Profit. Not at the expense of a social mission or something, but I believe that it all starts with profit, and I think that's one of the things that we can all see live and in color. If an idea is presented on Shark Tank and there are genuine profits and there are genuine sales, the folks are interested. And I think that's true in the broader community as well, whether it's venture capital, angel investing, or private equity.
I agree it's entertaining, but it's a fraud. First of all, they don't know the difference between pre-money and post-money. So they get someone out there and they say, I need 500,000 for half my company. So every one of the sharks says, you're not worth $1 million. No, they're only worth 500,000. That's what they're worth. They're worth 500,000 plus you give me 500,000 cash. They don't know the difference between the simplest thing in venture capital. They're not worth $1 million, they're worth 500,000. So that's one thing that gets me. The second thing is the sharks are making money for appearing on the show. The people who are making presentations, most of them just want to make a presentation, get free advertising, and go home, and they don't need the sharks.
And something about their ego probably as well.
So, I mean, the whole program is based on making money, not from the investments they're making in these companies, because it's a joke. Mark Cuban needs to invest $75,000 in something. For me, it's dirtying up my books. I don't want to have $75,000 investments. So the whole thing is a joke. You have to look behind the scenes. It's like having your children watch a TV show and they think it's real when animals are talking. This is a joke. It's not real venture capital.
Sure. I think there is a whole spectrum of colors when it comes to looking at investors, and I think Shark Tank might be one set of investors, at least in my experience dealing with venture investors. It kind of has to fit with the how do you say, the investment mission of the investor. If they like the space, if they know something about the space, if they have the right network in the space, and if they can add value to the business in that space, right? And just to give an example, I mean, we started Audicus, coming out of the hearing aid industry, and for a lot of traditional venture capital investors, this was a completely unknown field. It was a quote unquote unsexy field, and even though we were profitable when we went into the fundraising process, we had to, really learn how to pitch the story, because it was just something that, in spite of its profitability, just didn't resonate with everyone, right? And so either because it was a medical device, or because it was older people that needed it and that had to flock to the internet first, or because it was a regulated industry, there were a lot of moving pieces that, in spite of the profitability of the business, just didn't quite sit right with the expertise of the investor, right? So I think there is a whole range of additional considerations that just don't fall within the simple framework of Shark Tank.
I totally agree with everything that you've heard. I've not seen more than about 3 minutes of the show Shark Tank, but every now and then I get LinkedIn messages about it, because I was one of the founders or the last employee, depending on how you look at it, of a company called Shark Tank in 1999. And still, I guess people search on that term, and even though the date is way off, they'll send me a note. It's pretty interesting, but I've never been on the show and I've never really seen it.
But on Harry's point about how much theater it is, aside from pre and post money and all that, the Donald Trump show, The Apprentice, which was one of these early ones, I didn't watch that regularly, but flipping through the channel saw it. And remember, there was the older guy on one side and the woman on the other side, who was like his right-hand man and left-hand woman. So in Dobbs Ferry, where Mark Zuckerberg's dentist was my father, the woman on the show, was the bartender or the cocktail waitress at Doubleday's, the local bar. And then she wound up taking a job at the Trump National Golf Course in Briarcliff Manor. And when they went through, they said, "You look the part, come on the show." So there is a lot of theater going on. It's TV. But getting back to some reality and mixing with some hype, the Jobs Act, which stands for Jumpstart Our Business Startups, opening up the rules that had governed offerings or securities since the Exchange Act and the Securities Act back after the Great Depression. For the first time, that's being opened up and allowing things like crowdfunding. But when you combine that with shows like Shark Tank and Restaurant Startup and the kind of fear and greed that goes through any markets cycle, Do you think that these things, the Jobs Act, crowdfunding, both for equity and just for charity, as well as for for the just to invest to support someone, do you think that'll lead to a bubble, not so much just a tech bubble, but an investing or entrepreneurship bubble, and kind of shatter the dreams of a lot of wannabe investors and wannabe entrepreneurs?
I think crowdfunding and Shark Tank is terrific for getting the conversation going about entrepreneurship. I also think that some folks might only get $5,000, but maybe that's all they need from crowdfunding. I do think it's opened up the pathway for women and minority-owned businesses, particularly in crowdfunding. They've gotten the largest percentage of the money that's been generated. So it might not be a large sum of money, but it does produce a pathway to gain access to capital. And frankly, shows like Shark Tank do get the conversation going about entrepreneurship. So I'm a big believer.
Well, let me think. We've had a 6-year bull market. Everybody's making money. Index funds are up dramatically. S&P went up 30% one year, a few years ago. Everyone's making money. So they have crowdfunding now and crowdsourcing, and everyone's putting money in, and they're getting free ice cream, and they get to see a free show if they invest in a certain type of company. They're all going to start losing money when the market goes down. That we're in the tail end of a bull market. We're going to go down. We're going to get a correction. Every country in the world is doing lousy except the U.S. right now. So, I mean, who are we going to sell our goods to? They're all starving everywhere in the world. Nobody's doing well. It'll happen to us. It'll happen probably the second half of this year. And we'll go back down again. That's just the way it is. There's recessions, there's booms. We're in a boom. This is the best market we've had in a very long time. So I would say a lot of the people who are happy putting in $1,000, $750, when things are tough and the job market gets tough again and they don't have money, they'll say, where's my $750? Did it go up? So I think there are going to be problems with it, but I welcome it. It's nice to be able to get money when you're an entrepreneur. So I think it's a good idea, but the people do not realize things go down as well as up.
I think that's a good point. I would build on that. There are, I don't know about the market predictions, although you make me want to call my financial advisor. But there are 3 kinds of crowdfunding sites that I know of. Or types of crowdfunding that I know of. There's donation-based, there's lending, and there's equity-based. It basically has to do with, the difference is kind of what you get as a result of putting in some money, right? And so donation, maybe you get a cookie or a free t-shirt or something, first product as it gets released. And then the other 2 are fairly obvious. The Jobs Act, I think, has the biggest impact on equity. I've been pretty excited about the donation-based approaches and the debt-based approaches. In the case of donation, no one expects to get anything back except for the t-shirt or the first version of the product. In the case of debt, it's a little scarier, but there are lots of lending laws out there to try to help protect consumers. And usually there's, in those sites, so far there's a coupon or something. And even the sites, and I'm somewhat familiar with this having invested in one of these companies, even the sites like Lending Club that call themselves peer-to-peer financing, you don't have to go far beneath the covers to realize that almost all of the money comes from institutions, actually. So it turns out individuals thus far haven't proven themselves so interested in investing in lending-based crowdfunding, and the institutions who invest understand exactly what they're getting into. And so that leads us to equity, which is just now being opened up to the everyman, as opposed to investors, who are accredited. That scares me a little bit more. One of the reasons is the dynamic that you point out, which is I'm not sure that the everyman is ready, as I have experienced in my career, to lose money half the time, and to see their lemons ripen early, as John Doerr says. At the same time, I think equity lends itself much more to fraud, because for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that there aren't the same kinds of protections in place just yet. This is new laws. This is a new law. So there's a lot of potential, but equity in particular scares me for those reasons.
I think these concepts are a terrific idea, actually. I think it spurs entrepreneurship. It creates role models, like in the case of Shark Tank. I do think, for instance, if I look at my story at Auticus, we started the company with about $50,000 or $60,000, and we turned this into a profitable business in the first year and a half. Now, if there's someone out there in the U.S. that could have access to those 50K through a site like a crowdfunding site, then I'm biggest fan of them being able to not have that hurdle and go through the same experience that I did. So I think it's something that is an experiment. I think it's definitely an experiment that should run its course, and I think we should monitor it closely and be excited about it.
I mean, I'll say one positive thing in that note, because you make a good point, which is the sites that exist on the equity front do give me a little bit of hope around the fraud angle, in that sites like AngelList and AlphaWorks that I like a lot of the dynamic there is around kind of social proof, which, as an investor who gets paid for a living is not something I pay a lot of attention to, but as a layperson, it's actually not a bad data point to have. That is, who's investing, and is more likely than not to help prevent fraud. You get someone who actually undertakes diligence, who does that for a living, and so that's helpful on that front. That doesn't change the fact that they may not be prepared to lose their money, even though someone undertook good diligence. So as long as there's that kind of an intelligent lead in place, maybe it's not such a problem.
Yeah, maybe one last point also. I think it's a really good point. Maybe I shouldn't be talking that much about Shark Tank because I don't even own a TV, but I do think that the show itself tends to, how do you say, paint a pretty stark picture of investors. So for instance, like we raised our first round from investors, and I think every single one of them is awesome. I love every single one of these guys. I know I can call them at any point in time. They're almost on the personal level. They know they will be around when things go rough and when things go well. And so we do feel that it's not an antagonistic relationship that we have with investors, and I do think that most fundraising processes ultimately don't unfold in an antagonistic manner, at least not in the beginning.
I'm so glad you said it, because I can't say it as an investor. but I'll just point this out, which isn't the first time anybody's pointed out. And I'm stealing this. It might have been Brad Feld who said this for the first time. But I'll speak for Harry and for me to some extent. If you listen to entrepreneurs or anybody who's raised money from third parties, the vast majority of the time, if you get them alone, they'll tell you that they love their investors, and then you read in the press that venture capitalists are jerks. So take that for what it is.
Back when I was young, they had a program, big hit program, the $64 question. You get on the program, and if you're the big winner, you get $64. Well, these days, it's the $64,000 question. Now, I knew Merv Griffin. He came up with these shows like Jeopardy, and the one where he rolls the wheel around. He's making a fortune. He died a huge billionaire. So you look at the EB-5 program, which is full of corruption and people paying off to get EB-5 money in, and then they get free visas to the US and that sort of thing. The people making the money, even in crowdfunding, are the people who run the sites, the crowdfunding sites. They haven't had losses yet. Wait till the market turns down. Everybody will be crying, but those guys will have a lot of money.
So, one thing I did want to point out with the sites, whether it's Kickstarter, Indiegogo, on the, especially on the donation kind of side, one big advantage is that market validation. You put something up and it shows people want it, and you're forced to create your minimal viable product. You're forced to create like a great video pitch that the class is familiar with, a convincing pitch, marketing a product, and if you've got that many people signing on, at least it's giving something with market validation. But to go on something Harry's saying, the rest of the world is starving, perhaps a slight exaggeration, but if you look at countries, Japan, it was a very successful company. It was the third largest economy in the world, second largest economy in the world. But they've been in a recession for several decades, mainly because after the 70s they competed on efficiency, right? Doing things better, faster, cheaper, and the gains in efficiency get competed away to us, the customer, in the form of lower prices. So the only long-term prospect for sustainable growth is innovation. And I mean, Japan may be a very unentrepreneur country, but you hear the things all the time like, will China create like a Bill Gates? So to go back to the idea of how valuable the idea itself is, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg, will China or India create one of those? And by the way, what do those people have in common? Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg, they all went to the same school. And it's not Hard Knocks. It's not Harvard. They did drop out. They all went to Montessori schools, and they were taught very young how to think creatively. Montessori schools don't break you up in grades. It's more about playing, learning at your own pace, experiential learning. And it's interesting. All of them went to a Montessori, and Sergey and Larry, in a book, credit their Montessori upbringing with how important that was in creating Google. But on that, how just to give the idea aside, how important, leading again what Harry said, that these other countries don't have it. Why do you think we create entrepreneurs like that? And certainly other countries do as well. But why so much in America, and how important is it in other countries to foster that? I mean, China's doing so great on standardized exams, but they're not creating entrepreneurs. Japan, again, was a powerhouse of an economy, but how many Japanese entrepreneurs can you name, like Akio Morita from Sony and maybe one or two others? Where do you think the secret sauce, what's in the water of America creating these kind of entrepreneurs, not only with the ideas, but the ability to execute them? And, what does that mean for the rest of the world? And, is there something we were doing that we're at risk of not doing? And is there something other countries may be doing that will really catch up? And, will we be competing, for the brightest ideas and the brightest entrepreneurs? And will that be, the secret to our success? And, a generation or two ago, we said what's good for GM is good for America. Well, GM went bankrupt. And how many companies that were on the original Dow Jones Industrial Average are still on the Dow Jones Industrial Average? It's one, right?
You mind if I
Please
go ahead, Harry? A couple thoughts. One, I haven't invested in very many companies outside of the U.S. One that was based in India, at least mostly in India, taught me some lessons about business there, and some lessons about the advantages, frankly, of doing business in the United States. So I, until then, had sort of overestimated the importance of transparency and the rule of law, and even-handedness in the judicial system. And so, and all kinds of other things, labor practices and et cetera. And so I think we have some advantages in our legal system, in our intellectual property rights system, and even culturally over some other nations in fostering entrepreneurship. I also, for example, have worked with actually more than one French entrepreneur, and I love France, actually. My mother-in-law lives there, but what they continue to report to me is when I ask them, hey, France is kind of amazing if you ever spend any time there. Not that I don't love New York, but there are parts of France that are pretty great. Why, if you speak French, you grew up there, would you come to the United States to start a company. And basically the answer I get is twofold. One, labor laws are impossible to deal with there. And two, nobody looks on you a second time if you fail a first time. And that's true in a number of other countries. So I think we have a number of advantages. That said, I wish I had this slide. Tim Draper and DFJ put together a slide that includes the companies you just mentioned and a bunch of other of the biggest wins that we would think of in technology over the last 20 years, companies like Skype and Cisco and Baidu and others. And most of those companies have actually been started in the United States and grew in the United States, but also a large proportion of them were started by first-generation immigrants. And so one of the advantages that we have had as a country, in my view, historically, is that we have had an amazing university system that attracts immigrants to the United States. And then historically, we've been reasonably good about allowing them to stay here and build businesses here. And now we really suck at that. And that's a huge, huge problem. And I think we got to fix it. I'm a little bit heartened by the fact that, so I'm on the board of the New York Tech Meetup, and there are folks in the executive branch of the government at the highest level who are reaching out to organizations like the New York Tech Meetup around the country to help understand what they need to do with respect to immigration reform to ensure that we continue to have those innovators in the country. But getting anything done in Congress on that front is going to be hard. So that's my 2 cents.
Great.
I couldn't agree more with this, and I think I can speak firsthand. I'm originally from Switzerland. In fact, I'm a first immigrant in this country who went through a U.S. University system. And the reason why I ended up moving to the U.S. to start a business here is obviously there's a lot of factors from the legality standpoint as well. But I think the biggest reason is really ecosystem, right? You have a very fertile ecosystem of other entrepreneurs who are going through the same experience that you're going through. You have a very fertile ecosystem of advisors that can point you in the right direction or connect the dots for you or open doors. You have a very fertile ecosystem of investors, right? That can help you get your idea from a PowerPoint deck to something that is actually tangible. So, those three things, ultimately make for a very, very powerful mix. I mean, the first 6 months here in the US, I spent my entire time just talking to people, other entrepreneurs, investors, and advisors. And, this is something that just happens with far more friction back in Europe, far more friction.
Good.
Well, I think you have to look at the statistics. We are going down in research spending. China has gone way up in research spending. We're cutting back in a lot of areas, and other countries like China and India are growing a lot faster than we are. We have to look at the facts. In mathematics, we're something like 27th in the world. In grammar and English and things like that, languages, we're maybe 15th. Singapore is number 1, for example. And when I read great books on math, they're written by Europeans or Indians. So we are falling back when you look at the stats. We spend more per child on education than any other country. Number 2 is England. And way down the list are other countries. So we're spending a lot of money. We're throwing money at a problem, and that's not solving the problem. Now, to me, we don't stress speed. You have to be able to read faster, do math faster. You have to do everything faster. When I've been to China 120 times. They're stressing speed. You get a carpenter and he builds an addition for you and it takes him 2 days instead of 1 day, you're paying for it. My lawyer gave me a brief to look at. I looked at it. He said, "How did you read it so fast?" I said, "I studied speed reading." He says, "I read 200 words a minute." I said, "No wonder why my bills are so high." That's the truth. You gotta teach speed. Everyone, all of our children should be doing things faster, and we get no credit. If you finish a test a half hour ahead of anybody else, you do not get credit for that. So you just look at the facts. Every study has indicated we're way behind other countries in our education system. And yes, we have more entrepreneurs, but China is getting a lot of entrepreneurs now too. They're behind us, maybe by 2 decades, but they're catching up slowly. And if you study the Chinese mind, they don't care about getting Taiwan next year or the year after. As Kissinger's book said, oh, well, we'll wait 100 years. We'll own it in 100 years. That's the way they think. We don't have patience in the United States. They have a lot of patience. They have a 100-year plan. We can't even pass a budget for 1 year here.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I want to ask
Go ahead.
one thing. I agree a lot with what was said. The one thing I think where our country stands out is we are rewarded to take risk. And I think anybody who's thinking about starting a business believes that they have the opportunity to really make a success of themselves. And I still think that might separate us a little bit from other countries.
One other, actually, I would add I agree with that, but I don't want to leave this issue without hitting on the immigration thing one more time, because I do think it's a really big deal. So at Cornell, at Cornell Tech, there's a joint venture between Technion and Cornell Tech called the Jacobs Institute. And there's a program at the Jacobs Institute called the Runway Program. The Runway Program is for postdocs, PhDs who've done research, who want to commercialize that research. Because it's a partnership with the Technion in Israel, the majority of the 12 or 14 entrepreneurs, postdocs who've come into that program are not U.S. nationals. They're Israelis, and there's gentlemen from France. They're from all over the world, and they're starting businesses in the U.S. with proprietary technology. They're some of the smartest people that I've ever met. They're hiring people in New York and in the US, and they are battling for visas. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen from an economic policy perspective, and it just makes me irate. And if you're not irate in this room and you care about entrepreneurship at all, then maybe that story will help you get there. And so anytime you see any opportunity to speak out about that, please do.
No, and to tie in a couple things, the person leading that program is Uzi Dahan, someone I know who immigrated from the Netherlands to Israel and is now working over here. And if you read the book Startup Nation, you know how important immigration is to Israel. Instead of, when politicians run, they run on, we're going to bring more immigrants to the country. And when you hear these anti-immigrant things in the US, I think 40% of tech founders are first-generation Americans, of tech companies. It's incredibly important, and it's incredibly important in New York. And to tie together something Patrick said about the ecosystem, so not only are we competing with other countries, but New York has to compete against, neighbors New Jersey or Silicon Valley, Boston, Cambridge area. And one thing that then Mayor Bloomberg recognized is that one of the things we need is that real skilled people, the people with the applied sciences. So he, put together a plan to build a Cornell NYC Tech, which is going well past any election cycle. It's going to take billions of dollars and a decade to do. And, he said he believes that talent attracts capital better than capital attracts talent. And when he talked about building this to be able to get the talent you need here in New York, the Cornell NYC Tech, people mocked him and said, listen, you don't understand, Boston is a city, in the Northeast for schools. That's where everyone's going to want to go to school. And Bloomberg pointed out that New York City has more college students than Boston has people. So we have more people in colleges and universities in the 5 boroughs than Boston has people. And it really will be interesting to see, the outcome of the Cornell NYC Tech. So going back to the idea, I wanted to ask everyone just how important does the idea have to be to attract your attention, your interest, your time, your money? So, if there is someone who is cold calling, a LinkedIn, a referral, whatever, and he has this idea, what do you look for in the idea? So setting aside the entrepreneur and any business models, what is it about an entrepreneur that'll get your attention, your time, and eventually perhaps your money.
What is it about an entrepreneur? What is it about the idea?
What is it about the idea? So if you don't know the entrepreneur, you don't know their track record, you're not looking at the market in depth. Someone says, I have an idea. They catch you in the elevator, the typical elevator pitch, or come in through a soft connection, or approach you after a networking event like this and share an idea. What is it about the idea that'll get your attention, and eventually you'll give your time and perhaps your money?
Well, let me answer that.
Please.
I think if there's no size to the idea, if you get a deal like is on Shark Tank, where they're going to do $2 million and they think it's the best deal that's ever happened, that's for them. I'm not looking to make a living in the world of venture capital. I'm looking to make a killing. So the companies have to go up 10-fold, 50-fold, 100-fold. That has to be the goal. If they're going to double my money in 7 years, I'd rather buy junk bonds or whatever. So I'm looking for a big gain. I'm not looking for someone opening a Starbucks unless it's Howard Schultz, who I know, and he's got the smarts to do it. So you've got to look at it and say, does he have the ability to build this up? Or, Snake Shack? Shake Shack. Shake Shack. Okay. They're building stores all over. I went to one near me, and it was terrible. I mean, it was not a good shake. It was terrible. I'm never going to go again. So you get diluted as you grow. So what I look for is size and management. That's it. Does it have the potential to be a big company? And if the management's not right, I will augment the management.
I couldn't agree with that more. I talked before about market size and team. So with respect to the idea, it really boils down to market size. Although one other thing that Patrick said I think is relevant, which is when I hear a pitch, I do try to figure out whether I know anything at all about that business. And if I don't, then probably I'm not going to be interested. But I have a fairly broad purview of technology businesses, at least, that I can find interesting. I go pretty quickly, though, to team. So it really boils down to how big is the market. I'll put a number around that for people. So most, what I think of as professional angel investors and institutional investors who invest early in the life of a company will typically look for an addressable market or a TAM that's multi-billions of dollars on an annual basis. And it's important how you get to that number, which we can talk about offline, or you can, figure it out if you don't know already by looking up the definition. But getting to a company that is pursuing a market that is truly huge is key, at least early in the life of a company when I tend to invest, because when I hear a pitch from an entrepreneur, oftentimes I'll spend the majority of the time, or at least say the first third to half of the conversation, trying to understand as much as I can about the entrepreneur and the team. So I'll ask them questions about where they're from, how they got into the business, why, how things are going, etc. And often entrepreneurs will get anxious because they're not demonstrating the product. They're not talking about what it is they're building. And if I sense that that's the case, I'll say, listen, we'll get to the product. I want to hear a little bit about your idea. Mostly I care about the market, and the only thing I know for sure when I meet with an entrepreneur, again, usually soon after the founding of a company, is that whatever it is that they're producing at that time, whatever it is they're building, whatever that product is, it's not going to be the product that makes that company really large. Whatever it is going to evolve, it's going to change. And so that's why the market's so important and the team is so important.
Yeah. To add to that, I mean, besides, I agree, like market size is super important, but just to add to it, I think it's also where the market is going, whether it's a market that is, inherently growing, or has stable growth dynamics, or whether it's a market that, is on the downward trend. I'm sure like the market for fax machines is still pretty big, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of people that believe in it. And so from that standpoint, like if I talk about Audicus, I always mention the example of us investing in an emerging customer segment, which is the aging baby boomer segment that is moving online, right? If you look at the 50 to 70-year-old demographic, there is so much growth happening there, how they use the web, how they have been adopting the web, and it's a trend that's only going to go up. Right? It's not that older people are using the internet less than before. So you will need to kind of look for the big wave and make sure that you can surf it in the right direction.
How many people here have heard of the living dead? The worst thing is you invest in a company, it goes from 1 million to 3 to 5 to 5.5 to 6.2. You can't get out of it. You're stuck with it. You can't take your money out. You can't take it public. You can't do anything with it. You just have to sell your stake to management or get out of it any way that you can. And that's what they're doing on Shark Tank, by the way. They're investing in these living dead companies. They're never going to go anywhere. They're not going to go public. And the companies that I'm interested in, I would say it's maybe 4 or 5 out of 200 would I be interested in. And I would invest in 1 or 2 of those 5.
I agree. It's nice to have a big vision and invest in a big company. Sometimes you can't always have that opportunity. And then basically what I do is I scale my time based on the size of the investment and the size of the opportunity. One comment, I'm not sure it's directly related, is when entrepreneurs do pitch, one thing that I'd like to ask the panel about as well that kind of upsets me, I guess it's because I'm an entrepreneur and I've gone through the cycle of building companies and putting in the sweat equity and being uncertain about the outcome after all the years of work and labor. And then I go to these events where the entrepreneurs get up in front of the room and they have 2 minutes to present their idea. And I just think that is a very flawed way to make a judgment on what somebody has basically poured themselves into. And I'd like to know what the rest of the panel thinks about that.
And that's good because see this star? Ask each other a question. So
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't agree that that's a terrible idea. It's like when people send me a business plan and the executive summary is 7 pages. I said, come on. You know what Winston Churchill said? I'm sending you a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short letter. So I always try to make a business plan 1 page. I just want to get the attention of whoever it is I'm trying to get the attention of. And so 1 page suffices. So to me, if they have 2 minutes, they've got to think fast. They got to get the message across in 2 minutes, and that's okay. You talk to them later, they talk 10 minutes, and they talk themselves out of the deal. That's okay. But I just went to a conference where people had a 20-minute pitch. They had a fellow by the name of Dan Conley put it on. And he had 10 companies and gave a 20-minute pitch. It was terrible. I couldn't stand it. I mean, it was just dribble. They didn't know what they were talking about. Their PowerPoints you couldn't even read from 10 feet away. It was a disaster. Then he said, okay, now we've got the 5-minute presentations. I said, these are much better than the 20-minute presentations. Can the 20-minute presentations? I just want to know if there's something of interest there and I can spend a day with the company. So I don't want to spend 20 minutes listening to dribble. And it's a talent to be able to put things in 2 minutes or 1 page and get you interested. You've got to be able to write well.
Oh, and just to put in a plug, the PACE pitch contest, it's its 11th year, and Thatcher was a judge many, many years ago, and David Rose, the Simon Cowell of our judging panel. We have all kinds of people, but it's if you go to pace.edu/pitch, they have a full 3 minutes, and that'll be Thursday, April 16th at PACE. But I think there is a lot to that. If you're able to clearly, concisely, and convincingly say something, the idea is, like the resume doesn't get you the job, the resume gets you the interview and eventually the job. I think the same thing with the pitch. It gets you the time with the investor. And And I see a lot of value in that, and especially these days with 140-character tweets and one-paragraph Zagat reviews and everyone's short attention span, being able to do something that convincingly in 3 minutes is a valuable skill.
You've heard of the elevator?
The elevator pitch, yeah.
I've actually raised $1 million in an elevator within 20 seconds twice. Where I was in an elevator with someone, said, hey, I got a great deal. There's a bloop. He got off the next floor and he calls me up, said, I'm in for $1 million. So that's happened to me twice. You've got to be able to think fast. If you got 20 seconds to get your pitch, do it in 20 seconds. You know, if you got a half hour, do it in a half hour. But I hate it when people come to my office and give me a PowerPoint presentation and they put something on the screen with, let's say, 80 words. I've read the 80 words within, let's say, a half a minute. And they're still talking about it 10 minutes later. It's driving me crazy. So you've got to get through it. You know, you just point out the high points, you know, and don't read every word. It just drives me crazy. So, you know. Okay.
I think I get, you know, so I agree with everything that Harry said, but I understand what Skip said as well, which is, you know, if you look at those 2 minutes as, and if an entrepreneur looks at those 2 minutes as all the time they have to communicate everything that they've done with respect to the business, the blood, sweat, and tears that they've poured in, first of all, it's going to be a bad or maybe pathetic presentation. But secondly, it does have that feeling like it's just insufficient and almost cruel. But I don't know that that's the fault of the time limit. I think that maybe, you know, as you're saying, the fault of the entrepreneur. The goal, if you've only got 2 minutes, is to make sure you've clearly communicated at some level what it is that you're doing and who you are, so that if you're trying to raise money, any investor in the audience who knows something about that space and is interested in learning more about what you're doing knows enough to come after you to spend the day, as you were saying, or what have you. I also think that not only should an entrepreneur be able to describe, or I should be able to describe co-venture in 2 minutes or less, I should be able to describe it in a sentence or two or less and make sure everybody understands that. And so whether or not it's a sentence or two or 2 minutes or 30 minutes, I think you got to be able to communicate what's relevant. Also, can I take the elevator down with you?
I get that $3 million.
We'll see. We'll both try.
Maybe that's why business is so successful in Manhattan. We have all these skyscrapers where you have more time in the elevator. Out in the Midwest, the buildings are 3 and 5 stories high. But not to plug a book, but if you, Guy Kawasaki's The Art of the Start, I think it's chapter 3, The Art of Presenting, and he has The Art of Power Pitching is amazing and amazingly funny. It's 11 years old. He just came out with The Art of the Start 2.0. I haven't read it yet. But if you want some great tips, really valuable tips on presenting, Kawasaki's The Art of the Start is a good one. So I'm mindful of 8:15, and we could take the first question or two via Twitter, and if anyone's outside and wants to tweet in a question, and despite Microsoft not giving us a block of gold, I need my block. Where's my block of copper? See, that's how important the April Fool's Day joke was. I carried that 5-pound thing around with me all day. Okay, so last question before we actually let me ask two. One is how I'll combine the two into one question. So when you're gauging profitability, because that's the topic, balancing a cool idea with profitability. When you're trying to gauge profitability, which therefore is figuring out the valuation for the firm, how do you balance the idea with the entrepreneur? I mean, I think we've heard that the entrepreneur is more valuable and the ideas will change. But when you're thinking of looking at the potential profitability, what is the balance of the entrepreneur or entrepreneurial team's capabilities and the idea? And if I could also kind of roll in a second question, there are a lot of companies that have made a huge amount of money in acquisition, but never really had a business model, never had a profit. So if you look at Waze, right, Google bought them for $1 billion. If you look at WhatsApp, right, $19 billion. They had nothing, or even before that, $1 billion for, Instagram. Okay, maybe their business model, we don't care about a business model and profitability. We want to get enough eyeballs to just get acquired for $1 billion by Google, Microsoft, Facebook, etc. So can you talk about balancing the entrepreneur with the idea, and just a comment on this race for eyeballs without worrying about profitability? I guess we'll start with Skip.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a huge risk. One thing I do agree with Harry on, I think there's one thing, is there is an economic cycle, and there is the potential for another bubble. And a giant risk that I see out there is a lot of entrepreneurs are chasing users and eyeballs, and with the promise of future profits. And I think there's a big risk there. Now, it's certainly if you have exponential growth like Facebook, Uber, that's a little different. You can ride that wave for a while. But if you do not have exponential growth and it's incremental growth, and there is an economic cycle or a bubble, which inevitably there is, you could get crushed if you don't have a business model that has the potential to truly generate profit. And if all of your focus is on user acquisition, and you haven't taken your business or tested your business and made sure that it can in fact make a profit, I just think that's a huge risk.
I'll just answer as briefly as I can. To me, there's only two things I worry about: my price going in and my price when I exit. Some people have a stock and they worry, oh, it went down 3 points today, it went up 2 points the next day. Every day they're worried and they're looking at the screen. I don't really care. It's like if I have a summer home and the value is going up and down, what do I care? I only care when I sell the summer home. Otherwise, the price of it doesn't matter to me. So as far as profits are concerned, if it helps me sell the company, I want the profits. And you know what a lot of companies do, including my companies? You cut down R&D, you cut down expenses, and suddenly your earnings go way up and you sell the company. That's what you do. So you can doctor up your results to sell the company advantageously. So I've sold probably 50 companies. I've taken 50 companies through the IPO process. Doesn't make any difference to me. I want to exit. Every investment I make, I'm looking at an exit, either selling or IPO.
So the cycle is a risk. I've been remarkably bad on a relative basis investing in companies that generate value solely out of building a user base. That said, there are people who've made a lot of money doing that. And I think that as an entrepreneur, sort of as you heard before, if you have a truly viral business that is a K factor greater than 1, every time you add a user, you get more than 1 new user. Then, and you can find investors who have reasonably deep pockets and who are patient, then it can be a completely rational, even smart thing to do, to focus entirely on user growth and to chuck revenue and profit completely out the window. But the companies that fit into the bucket I just described, usually the number can fit on my hand in a given year, and sometimes in a 2 or a 3 year time period. And so those are extraordinarily rare. And the rest of the time, what I look for and what growth investors and technology stocks look for, and what a lot of other early stage investors look for, is the potential for wild profitability. So software and internet-related companies, generally speaking, are the most profitable legal businesses in the world. If you want to do better, you have to go to something illegal like drugs. Or legal drugs like pharmaceuticals, if you can spare the money for the R&D expense. And so that means that when I meet with an entrepreneur, even though they're guessing at what the business will look like in steady state, I have to believe that the business could be a 70 or 80% gross margin business or better. Those businesses are also pretty hard to find, but they number more than the 2 or 3 or 4 per year that come along that fit into the first bucket, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the steady state has to be profitable, and it has to be so you can be self-sustainable, and it can be independent, and you can create options for yourself, right? Speaking as an entrepreneur, options, having alternatives at any point in the cycle is fundamental, whether it's having the option to take financing or not take financing, having options on who you sell the company to or not. All these things will open up once you reach that realm of profitability. Now, the road to profitability oftentimes will take you through areas where you're not profitable, and you will have to invest in user growth, and this could be over a prolonged period of time. So, but fundamentally, there's got to be an underlying business case to it, such that once you've acquired the users, or you have a predictable way of making money off of it.
One other thing, you have to be able to withstand a downturn in the market for your product or in the stock market. And so you have to look at your balance sheet. Do you have enough money to go through the hard times? Now, I'm looking at the IPO market. It's been vibrant for 5 or 6 years. And I would call my people together and say, the window is going to close. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means no IPOs for 3 years, 5 years, 1 year, whatever it will be. The windows for IPOs will close sometime in the next few years. You will not be able to go the IPO route. So I would say we've got to look to sell our companies, start calling people to buy our companies, because we're not going to be able to take it public in the next 3 years. It takes about 6 months to do the legal work and all to go through the IPO process. So you got to plan ahead.
Okay. So we're going to go to questions. If you want to tweet a question, again, to @DisruptiveTech, that way it has to be concise. And when we do go to questions, if you say your name and make sure to ask a question, not make a statement. But let me just close.
One of your microphones to use for the questions.
Thank you, Jolly. So just to close, I have an entrepreneurship class here today. We're on a field trip. But last night, I had a strategy class, and we did a case study on Apple. And I just want to read one short quote that Steve Jobs said about the company, talking about profitability and cool ideas. Our primary goal as a company is to make the world's best PCs, not to be the biggest or the richest. We have a second goal, which is to always make a profit, both to make some money, but also so we keep making those great products. So with that, we have a mic. If you any Twitter questions, get right to the front of the queue. But let's go over here. Again, if you just say your name, organization, and question, if you want to state it to anyone specifically or just in general. Can you hear me okay? I don't think it's on. Try it now.
Hello? Can you hear me okay now? My name is Bruce Crawford. I run the Entrepreneur Forum in New York. And my question is for the entire panel. Harry, one thing that you said was, in selecting the management, in terms of changes you would make, that you had 4 companies where you walked in and said, now you are head of engineering and no longer CEO. Now my question is, how is this set up with the investors and the initial founders and managers? Because the investors will want to have the power to make changes in management if they see things going south, but the entrepreneurs may also want to protect themselves from Harry walking in and saying, Skip or Patrick, sorry, you're out of here in terms of running it. Now you're in the back office somewhere. So how does that work? And what is the general time frame? As an investor, Harry, do you say at the very beginning, okay, I've already assessed you guys, and I think I need somebody else running this, or do you wait until you've seen it for a year and then bring in some additional management?
Well, simple answer to your question. Number one, they're going to me to raise money and to lead the round. I call the shots. I'm not going to invest unless you're good with bringing in a CEO. So it's very simple when I'm the lead investor coming in on a round. Once I'm on the board of the company, it's a matter of getting the board members to agree to change the management. And I try to do it in concert with the CEO and the CFO, and I try to make everybody happy and say it'll be better for all of us. We'll make a lot of money. You won't be traveling so much. So, I lay it out in as nice a way as I can that we need a fuller management team. We need a chairman, for example, that will bring in, who will set the agenda. So it depends on whether I'm leading around, in which case I call the shots. I'm not coming in unless they do what I say. Once I'm there, it's a matter of working with the board in a nice way to try to make things happen. And all the work at the board is done in advance of the board, not at the board meeting. It's all set. Once I walk into the board meeting, I know who's going to second the motion. I know who's going to vote with me. The work is done before the board meeting.
Thank you. And now we're going to jump the question queue from Twitter, from the fake Joel, Disruptive Techs. In a sentence, what would you tell a college student looking to start their own business?
Maybe I get
That's
started.
a good question because there was a pause.
Yeah, I think the trick is just to start somewhere. I think at the beginning, a lot of people just overanalyze and like spend a lot of time, in that paralysis by analysis state. And I think at some point, even if you have an idea that is half-baked, is like 5% there, at least it's a canvas that you can start painting on, right? And the first stroke will lead to the second stroke, and then the third, fifth, and then at some point you will have a painting, right? But you just need to start somewhere and start iterating.
Good. Do it and iterate. The canvas, the business model canvas, the lean startup, minimal viable product, that whole new movement, I think, is very valuable and reflects that. Thatcher?
Yeah, I would say building on that, do something that you know something about.
Thatcher, just steal his mic.
Do something that you know something about, that you have some familiarity with, and work to know more about it than anyone else.
Harry, you want to finish that?
Maud has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done a lot of entrepreneurship. I've funded 400 startups and about 300 IPOs for early stage companies. 400 companies for which I raised over $3 billion in relatively small amounts. And I am also had the good fortune of investing with Harry, and in the investments I made with him, I made, as he says, a large multiple. So thank you, Harry. What I'd like to ask Harry, because he's done it so well, I've always had a problem of how big a board I should accept for these early stage startups.
What a great question. I am writing my second book on exactly that subject. This is not a setup.
It wasn't a setup.
He does not know
Look,
this.
Okay.
But I'm on boards, and it's very funny, and I'm going to make this book funny. I'm going to say that the complexity of holding a board meeting starts off at 5% once you have more than 5 board members, and goes up geometrically. You add another board member, it's 25% harder, then 125% harder. It's almost impossible to hold a board meeting once you have 9 members. If you have, John, how many members does Wolfenson have at the World Bank? 120. He's never been able to hold a real board meeting. I mean, half the people are missing. So I'm on a lot of boards. So what happens? We're having a board meeting 11 o'clock Tuesday, April 19th. Well, the words come back. Somebody says, look, that's the one day that I have a hair appointment. You can't have it on that day. Then a guy says, I'm going to be in Thailand on that day. And he says, how about next week? And so everybody comes up with another date. And it's impossible to hold a meeting. So when I have a board of 11 people, you give up, forget it. And then, when does the meeting start? It starts at 11. So what happens? Well, we got to wait. Joe Blow is coming. This guy is coming. So it starts at 11:30. The whole thing is ridiculous. So I'm going to write. Has anybody ever read Parkinson's Law? It's a great book. It's funny. It's a management book that's funny. I'm going to write a book along the line of Parkinson's Law. I'll give you an example. He says, I would never hire a good guy as my assistant. In 5 years, he'll make half my money, and he'll know more than me about the business. I'm going to hire A and B, and they'll knock each other off instead of me. And then A will hire C and D, and B will hire E and F, and pretty soon all we'll be doing is reading memos sent between us. That's Parkinson's Law. You all ought to read that book. So I'm going to write a book, something like that. That's funny. Because
I
boards
hate
are
to just
funny.
jump in here. We always keep our time really. We try to keep to our time, and it's 8:30, and we usually end. And we usually have a happy hour that's discounted somewhere, but we actually don't have a place to go to because I couldn't get discounts anywhere yet. This is our first time here. You're welcome to stay. It looks like the panelists are really enjoying themselves. You are welcome to move forward and talk with them. I often ask them to stay and go to the happy hour. This way they can just sit here. There's wine outside, and there's hint water, which is our disruptive water. Grab a bottle and enjoy yourselves if you want to stay. But please, the portion of the thing is over right now.
So the discounted happy hour is incredibly discounted to zero free wine in here. So thank you all.
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Oh, and one more thing. Thank you, Skip, for bringing that preview of your book. There's some really, really great chapters in there. There's a bunch of startup information that can't be missed. So thanks.
Okay, yeah.
I'm just curious how big a valuation
They put a 50 million.
50 million.
Yeah.
Pretty big valuation for a startup. So was Larry King.
Well, it had Larry King, John King, Carlos, and even the guy from AIG was on it too. So,
Good.
how you doing? Thank you very much.
That's on my business card. That's
Thanks.
me.
Yeah.
Here you go.
So you're a pace, right?
I am.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I had so many more things.
Here.
I'm flying.
Actually wearing the...
Yeah, definitely. You said the
far more valuable.
forum.
Okay.
Okay.
We should stay in contact because I also
It's on Amazon now.
much in the
Okay.
space. I've been running events since 2009.
Okay.
Okay.
Even let this guy speak at one of my